huna te kōkō uri, huna te kōkō tia, huraina te māramatanga, kia kitea tōna mata. Welcome to Mata with me, Mihingarangi Forbes, brought to you by Te Māngai Pāho and Irirangi Te Motu, New Zealand On Air. Later in the program, we'll speak to Green MP Tamatha Paul about the return of boot camps with the launch of a military-style academy pilot in Te Papaioia, Palmerston North. Engari, mātua rā I tū te puehu I waingi te kāwanatanga me te iwi nui rawa atu o Aotearoa. Yesterday, Ngāpuhi representatives led a hīkoi to Parliament in opposition to the repeal of Section 7AA of the Oranga Tamariki Act. 827 tamariki currently in state care, whakapapa to Ngāpuhi. It comes just days after Ngāpuhi walked out of the Iwi Leaders Forum, which was attended by both the Prime Minister and a delegation of Cabinet Ministers. Ngāpuhi representatives citing the impact of the coalition government's policies on Māori. We invited the Minister for Oranga Tamariki, Karen Chaw, to be interviewed, but she wasn't available. Nō reira, hei ā tamatapaki I ēnei take, ko hono mai te mema parimata o reipa. I'm joined by Labour Northland List MP and spokesperson for Children and Youth, Willow-Jean Prime. Tēnā koe e mara. When the Prime Minister stood to address the Iwi Leaders Forum last week, the Ngāpuhi delegation walked out. What do you make of their reasoning, and do you support that move?
So what I have heard from Ngāpuhi, who have brought their message direct to the steps of Parliament, is that they are hoha. They are hoha with policies and legislation that this government is driving and the impact that that is having on Māori. And included in that is, of course, the repeal of Section 7AA. And so those policies have driven them or backed them into a corner, I believe are the words of Mane Tahiri, and has left them no option but to walk out of meetings like that to demonstrate their disapproval of what this government is doing, as well as coming to Parliament to protest and to make submissions in the Select Committee.
Was the government present to receive the protest?
No, sadly, there were no representatives from the government at the protest yesterday to receive Ngāpuhi's delegation and messages. There were only representatives from the opposition parties and members who are on the Select Committee.
Interesting, because the chair of Ngāpuhi was present at the hīkoi to Parliament, and we've just heard the Prime Minister and other ministers talk about these strategic partnerships that are important to this government with iwi. With the repeal of Section 7AA, do you think that those strategic partnerships will remain in place?
Well, the Minister promises that regardless of the repeal of Section 7AA, which removes the requirement for the Chief Executive of Oranga Tamariki to form strategic partnerships, that those will remain. Yet I have put this question to iwi partnerships and Māori time and time again in the Select Committee process. Were you consulted? And they all say no, they have not been consulted by the Minister about the repeal of Section 7AA. Do you think it is appropriate that the Minister says the place for this conversation and consultation is at a Select Committee? No, that does not uphold te tiriti or waitangi and what the expectations of consultation would be. How do you feel when the Minister refuses to listen to you and your opposition to the repeal on the one hand, and yet says she's still willing to work with Māori in order to progress, certain matters? And I think that they have clearly said that there is an issue around trust and confidence, and that they believe that you need to leave the legislative provisions in there to require the CEO of Oranga Tamariki to do that, and not leave that up to chance or words that this minister is saying.
Last Friday, the Prime Minister, Christopher Luxon, responded to the walkout which was Ngāpuhi again that walked out of the iwi Leaders Forum here in Tāmaki Makaurau, saying the forum was a valuable opportunity for iwi leaders and the government to listen, be heard and share solutions. He said the government is focused on turning around years of decline in Māori outcomes, particularly in health, education, employment and housing, overseen by the previous government. What do you make of that statement, given this government has disestablished Te Aka Whai Ora, it's supporting the upcoming Treaty Principles Bill, overturned the seabed and foreshore judgment, and legislative changes to Māori wards?
I think that the Prime Minister is disingenuous when he says that it is a good opportunity to listen, to learn and to share solutions, because Ngāpuhi's walkout from that meeting and their arriving at the steps of Parliament to deliver their message is a demonstration that this government is not listening to what Māori are saying. There are no Māori that have submitted to the Select Committee who have said we support the repeal of Section 7AA. They are all opposed. The Minister says they are entitled to their own opinions. That's the strategic partners. The Prime Minister refuses to listen to what those iwi Māori partners are saying about the repeal of Section 7AA. And they're refusing to engage in the alternative solutions to what problems the government might see, which has led to why they believe Section 7AA needs to be repealed. So if that were true, what Luxton is saying, then iwi like Ngāpuhi would not be walking out of the meeting and would not be coming to the steps of Parliament. They have been backed into a corner. They are absolutely, desperately trying to get this government to listen and to stop what it is that they are doing, which they say is causing harm to our mokopuna.
Where does it go from here in terms of, these strategic, so-called strategic relationships, when our largest iwi in the country, Ngāpuhi, feels like they're not being listened to?
I think that the government has to acknowledge that you can't say one thing and do another. If it was genuine about its partnership with Māori, and particularly when we talk about Oranga Tamariki, Section 7AA is about giving practical effect to the principles of Te Tiriti o Waitangi. It is about requiring Oranga Tamariki to develop and maintain strategic Māori partnerships. It is about a commitment to demonstrate how they are reducing the disparities for the disproportionate number of tamariki in state care and the disproportionate number of Ngāpuhi tamariki. As we've heard Ngāpuhi say, a third of those children in care are Ngāpuhi. So on the one hand, they are saying one thing, we want to work with you. And on the other hand, they are doing another thing. We are repealing the very legislative requirement that requires us to do that.
7AA was a compromise that was introduced by Anne Tolley, and the initial policy was whānau first, which means whānau first. I guess if Labour gets back into government, will you restore the whānau first law?
So Section 7AA is a response to decades of evidence and complaints that the system was colourblind to Māori, that we were not thinking about whakapapa, whānau connections, whanaungatanga as being part of the important well-being and best interests of a child, and that we needed to have mechanisms in place that held Oranga Tamariki accountable. What I have heard through the submissions is that Section 7AA is absolutely necessary, and it has had more positive outcomes than any negative outcome that anybody can point to, but that it also doesn't go far enough, and that there is more work for the government, for Oranga Tamariki to do. And those include the recommendations in the Royal Commission's report. Within those 138 recommendations, within the Waitangi Tribunal's recent reports, there are recommendations about how to strengthen Section 7AA. And so that is something that I would like to look more closely at. Section 7AA, as it currently is the minimum. I believe what people are saying, what submitters are saying needs to be in there, but there is so much more that could be done.
In the very least, Labour would commit to restoring 7AA?
So we do have to go through our policy process. Of course, we support it being in there as it is. We do not support the repeal of it. But what I'm also saying is that actually this is an opportunity for us to look at what more we could do in terms of Section 7AA, because we have Waitangi Tribunal recommendations about it being a minimum, not the be-all and end-all, not the start and finish. We also have the Royal Commission's report, which talks about Te Tiriti o Waitangi and how important that is to have in our children's system. So I think that it's not simply a case of reinstating what was there. We have an opportunity to look at what we could do to further enhance it, strengthen it, and align it to those recommendations of the Waitangi Tribunal and the Royal Commission.
But what we are talking about, we're talking about policies that are harmful to rangatahi and in particular rangatahi Māori. What about the Ram Raids bill, which is currently going through Parliament? Isn't this also a bill that will harm rangatahi and in particular enable children to be criminalised? That was introduced by the Labour government last year. Is this something that you would be committed to dropping?
So that bill is currently before Select Committee, and we are waiting for the Select Committee report back on that. I know that there have been many submissions to that. The issue and the challenge that we have is with youth crime and youth justice. And one of the drivers behind that and the reasons for it was so that we could ensure that tamariki, that rangatahi, are getting the necessary supports and wraparound services that they require to help them stop reoffending, stop committing these offences. We have another harmful policy by this government that we see right now, which is the reintroduction of boot camps, a military-style approach, a punitive approach to the rehabilitation of these serious young offenders. The evidence shows that those do not work. And yet we have the circuit breaker and fast track, which Labour were responsible for, funded and supportive of, which the evidence is showing does work. So how do we ensure that the programs that are funded and supported to help address this issue are, in fact, the ones that we invest in?
Just quickly before we go, Children's Minister Karen Shaw, we did invite her to come on and she has declined. She said in recent days that she feels targeted and bullied. What's going on?
Well, it's really for her to speak to her feelings about this. What I know as Labour spokesperson for children is that she is the minister responsible for the progression of some seriously bad policies and legislation, the repeal of Section 7AA, the reintroduction of military-style academy boot camps, the cuts to community providers working in the prevention space. The debate is robust. The questions are forthright. She needs to be accountable as the minister for those.
Has her treatment been unfair?
I think that the discussion has been passionate and robust. She is responsible for some really terrible policies that the submitters, the public, iwi, providers, survivors are all saying are wrong, and she needs to be held accountable for her decisions that she is making and is responsible for those portfolio areas.
Tēnā koe. Ko Willow-Jean Prime, tērā. Last week, the government launched a controversial boot camp pilot in Te Papaioia, Palmerston North. 10 youth offenders aged between 15 and 18 will participate in the program. Local rangitane leader Mihingarangi said his iwi was not consulted about the pilot and is critical of its approach, saying they would have said no to it. The government remains committed to the program despite damning findings into the Whakapakari boot camp and others raised in the Royal Commission of Inquiry into Abuse in Care. Oranga Tamariki Minister Karen Shaw says the pilot is nothing like past boot camps and will be underpinned by intensive case management. Among those voicing their opposition to the pilot is Green MP Tamatha Paul, and she joins me now. Tēnā koe te tuakana.
Kia ora mihi, kei te pēhia.
Pai ana. Survivors attending Parliament at the apology for state abuse were yelling, "No more boot camps." Yet days later, this government pushed ahead with a military-styled boot camp in Te Papaioia, Palmerston North. Survivors say it's a kick in the guts. Do you agree?
I 100% agree with survivors that launching these boot camps, despite the fact that in the abuse and state care report, there's an entire report and chapter, a 100-page chapter dedicated to the abuse that was endured at boot camps in our history. And survivors have said boot camps do not work. They traumatize people who are already deeply traumatized, and it leads to a pathway of abuse of people who have experienced nothing but abuse in their lives. So it really is a slap in the face to those survivors for the minister to, on the one hand, get up and make, a very emotional speech about the report, and then just days later to go directly against the recommendations of survivors around not setting up boot camps, not going down the military path when it comes to young people who have caused harm in their communities.
Children's Minister Karen Chaw says there won't be abuse in those camps. She won't guarantee it. How can you say it if you can't guarantee it?
Exactly. I mean, if you can't guarantee that abuse isn't going to happen, then we should not be going down that pathway. And I don't find the minister's assurances comforting at all. And I visited one of these child prisons, which is what they are, a few weeks ago down in Christchurch. And they are child prisons, and you can tell that they're not environments that are going to help rangatahi to heal. They're not situated within the community. They're kind of out the way, out in, on the outskirts of these cities. I just know that these are not going to work. They're not going to turn young people's lives around. And it really just capitalizes on the hysteria that this government has whipped up around young people and made them into a political football, and put this idea out there that if we punish young people and we put them through these military boot camps, that they're going to somehow change. And the evidence shows that this approach does not work. And this iteration will be no different.
The Children's Minister might argue that the place that you visited a couple of weeks ago is, in fact, keeping young people out of jail, though.
These are essentially jails, these youth justice residences. They have towering fences all around them. The rooms are like cells. They have windows in the doors. These are child prisons, and that's why there's been a call from organisations like Just Speak to actually close all youth justice residences around the country. And I believe the Children's Commissioner did an unannounced visit to youth justice residences and found that there were massive breaches to the conditions that children were living in, and that there were staff members sneaking contraband to young people, and all sorts of activity was happening within these residences. So they're not places, meeting what I see as the drivers of youth crime call for a health and a socio-economic response, because we know that the drivers of youth crime is poverty, material poverty, and a poverty of opportunity. But there's also other factors that need to be taken into account, such as brain development, and how when you're a child, your brain is still developing, that impacts your ability to consider the consequences of your decisions, to create that you have issues with regulating your emotions and being more susceptible to peer pressure. And a lot of the young people that are ending up in youth justice residences, they have experienced abuse. They've been living in poverty.
Yeah.
They have got health issues, and none of these are addressed within a criminal justice.
We still do have youth that are committing crimes against, people in communities. So if there is no place in your mind for boot camps, and if you're supportive of closing down the youth residences, what is the alternative?
Well, when I went to the youth prison in Christchurch, one thing I heard about was how young people were committing crimes because if they went back to that youth prison, then at least they would be guaranteed a roof over their head, daily meals, and protection from abusers that they had at home. And that's a really stark picture to be painting, because it shows that in order for people to meet their basic needs, they feel that they need to commit crime in order to end up back in those youth justice residences. So I think there is a real question about poverty in there and the way that that increases crime. But in general, we can see that youth crime is actually decreasing. There was a spike during the COVID lockdowns, but youth crime overall is decreasing thanks to evidence-based programs that support young people, the organizations on the ground that help young people to get their license, open a bank account, find training and education opportunities. Those are the organizations doing the real mahi, but sentencing young people to prison, which is what youth justice residences are, is not going to help them turn their lives around. And things like military boot camps will in fact make it even worse.
What's your policy in terms of keeping the community safe? Because it's not going to change overnight. We're still going to have youth that are committing violent crimes. So in the meantime, while the Green Party policy of like putting a roof over people's houses, in the meantime, what do you think should happen with these young people?
In the meantime, I think that we need to take a health-based and an economic response to young people, because again, I believe that young people that commit crime are coming from some of the most impoverished communities where there is no hope, there is no investment and opportunities for these rangatahi. And I've spoken about that heaps because I grew up in a town like that where the only investment that we ever got was new alcohol stores, new vape shops, new pokie machines, no kind of pathways for training or mahi or education. And so our policy is really about making sure that communities have everything that they need. And that might sound wishy-washy, but the connection between poverty and crime is undeniable. But also for me, I want us to move away from a criminal justice response and towards a response where we can identify health issues, mental health. We can help to deal with mental health and addiction, where there are good pathways for rangatahi in terms of if they want to study or if they want to train, making sure those pathways are available and not describing and labeling our rangatahi as offenders or criminals. I think that is the key.
In terms of the Royal Commission, you were there on that day. Do you think the political establishment has taken this landmark report seriously enough, and will they do what's necessary for survivors, do you think?
I didn't feel confident in the government's responses. There wasn't a commitment to delivering all of the 138 recommendations in the report. And the fact that, like you said earlier, that the Minister of Children would make an apology one week and the very next week launch these military boot camps is a real kick in the face. And when I spoke to survivors on that day as well, that was their key message is, we cannot go ahead with these boot camps because they are setting up an opportunity for more abuse by the state of our rangatahi.
Do the Greens accept all the recommendations? Will they all be implemented?
We 100% support every single recommendation in the report, and we'll stay on the government to make sure that they deliver them all. But I was happy to hear that the minister will be working with people like Eugene Ryder, who is dedicated his life to helping people to understand, speaking about the abuse that he endured in state care, how that led him towards, joining the Black Power, and how they might take into account a survivor-led solution to what's going on. So if they listen to people like Eugene, they continue to listen to survivors, then I hope they will implement those recommendations. But I mean, even just this week, we saw Judith Collins saying that they won't be implementing all the recommendations around the Royal Commission inquiry into March 15th. So, yeah, I think there really needs to be a mindset shift within the government, and they do need to take every recommendation seriously, which begins with not removing te tiriti from the Oranga Tamariki Act.
Yeah, let's talk about the former Children's Minister Tracy Martin says the principle which binds Oranga Tamariki to te tiriti, a law that ensures the Chief Executive creates iwi relationships and reports on those relationships to Parliament. She says it must stay in place. She says that National should invoke the agree to disagree clause and renegotiate the 7AA clause. From where you sit on the opposition bench, can you see this working or happening?
I know for a fact that we would be stoked if New Zealand First removed their support for this callous and ideological and divisive move by the Minister and the ACT Party. You know, we really just want the government to do the right thing here and to listen to the overwhelming voice of iwi and hapu and people that work with children that have come in over the last few months to talk to us about why it is so important that every tamariki Māori has access to who they are, their whakapapa and where they come from.
Exactly what she was saying. To be fair, she was talking, Tracy Martin was directing that challenge, agree to disagree clause to the national ministers to agree to disagree with their partners, their coalition partners.
Yeah, I think the government parties should really unshackle themselves from ACT's divisive agenda to divide our country and to treat Māori as a political football, but worse, to treat our tamariki and our rangatahi as a political football. It's not too late for the government and for the Prime Minister to show leadership in this area. I know that, you know, if he were to go back on the support that they've been offering around 7AA, that would be hugely popular and show that he's taking his commitments under Te Tiriti seriously.
Tēnā koe Tamatha.
Kia ora mihi.
Kua hua te marama ki tēnei hōtaka. Tēnā tāwharautia koutou I te anu o Takurua. Hei te rua wiki wānanga anō ai tātou. Thank you to our manuwhiri Tamatha Paul and Willow-Jean Prime. Ka nui hoki te whakaute ki te Māngai Pāho me irirangi te motu. Nā raua tēnei hōtaka I taunaki. We'll be back in a fortnight. No horo mai.